Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome back to AI and the Future of Work. This is your host, Dan Turchin, advisor at Insight Finder, the system of intelligence for IT operations, and CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. Thanks again to all of you for helping turn this passion project into one of the most downloaded podcasts about the future of work. If you like what we do, please like, comment, or share this episode in your favorite podcast app. We read all of the comments. We reply to most of the comments. Your feedback is incredibly valuable. Now, every week we discuss AI and the future of work from the perspectives of AI, technology, bias in data, research, business, etc. We haven't yet had a guest who spends essentially all of his time thinking about and writing about the very essence of work. To quantify that, he delivered over 100 lectures on the topic just last year alone during the pandemic. I'm so excited about this conversation because all of the really big topics we explore are fair game today. What's the future of communities? How do you find your passion? How do you achieve a state where the thing you do for play feels like the thing you do for work? What's the role of technology in the future of work? Where are there opportunities for entrepreneurs to accelerate that future? Gary Bolles is a deep thinker who established roots in Silicon Valley back in the 80s to pursue joint passions for technology, but also exploring what he calls the three boxes of life: learning, work, and leisure. He's the author of The Next Rules of Work, which will be published in a few days from now, I believe August 31. We are taping this just a few days from then. He's also the chair of the Future of Work at Singularity University, a venture advisor, and an entrepreneur, having founded eParachute, among other companies. Oh, and by the way, Gary's LinkedIn courses have helped train more than 600,000 students. Without further ado, it really is my pleasure to welcome one of the foremost authorities on the future of work to the podcast. Gary, welcome, and let's get started by having you share a little bit about your background and how you got into this space.
Oh, Dan, thanks for the invitation. I'm looking forward to the witty banter that you promised me. When I barely escaped high school, I was never much interested in college. And so I sort of fell into the family business. And it just so happens that my father was a recovering minister who had gone to help other ministers who had been laid off just as he had, and ended up writing what became the world's career manual, What Color Is Your Parachute? So at the age of 19, I was trained in his methods. You would think I would have learned how to be able to make great career choices, but I continued to do a series of odd jobs until in my mid-20s, I sort of fell into high tech. And since then, I've worn just about every hat you can wear, from serial, sometimes parallel entrepreneur, tech executive. And then for the past 10 years, I've become fascinated by tectonic shifts in a range of different areas, learning, work, future of the economy, and started to write and lecture on those topics. And because we were actually working with Singularity University as a client, helping them with strategic conferences, I got pulled into speaking more and more about those topics. And so I joined them as the chair for the future of work about a half a dozen years ago. And at the same time, my father also wanted to bring much of his thinking online. And so we co-founded a company called eParachute.com. And the result is very pivotal time. About a year and a half, 2 years ago, you would have thought you would pick a topic that was going to be top of mind for people pretty soon. The future of work seems to have certainly fit the bill.
In your writing and speaking, you talk about the Great Reset. Tell us about the Great Reset.
So you can hear sirens in the background, so that must be people alarmed about the Great Reset. So which unfortunately did have a pretty global impact. So as the pandemic was starting to take shape in March of 2020, I looked back at previous resets that we've experienced in terms of societies, industries, economies. And they all seem to have three phases. There's this falling off the cliff phase of 100% uncertainty. There was this bouncing along the bottom phase, a fever chart of turning things back on again, turning them off again, depending upon the Venn diagram of what's going on in your particular location. And then there was a third phase of building into sort of what the new post-impact economy looked like. And I said that it was pretty likely in an article that I wrote in April of 2020, we're going to follow the same three phases, but they're happening with blinding speed. We went from about 3.5%, 4% unemployment in the United States to 17% unemployment in about 3 weeks. And so I said, well, we're probably going to go through these phases, and then the ripple effects on work. So many of the things we talked about as the future of work, which is normally not about the future, is actually about the present. And the accelerator was, the pedal went to the metal with the great reset of the pandemic. And so we adopted many of what I've called the next rules of work almost overnight.
Last year, you set a blistering pace. I think it was about 2 lectures a week. So I think it qualifies you to be an authority on the topic. What will be the enduring legacy of the pandemic on work?
So there's a lot of speculation about that. In some places, we're still in the second phase where the lights have been turned off again. The pandemic is still, on a global basis, is still having some pretty profound effects and impacts on people, their lives, their jobs, and their organizations. And my heart goes out to them, because it's very difficult to be thinking about what could last when you're still so deep into the challenges that the pandemic has brought. But there are places where we're starting to see some of the likely changes that are going to keep hold. And I think there's a lot of focus on what is often called hybrid work, a lot of the issues of whether or not you're thinking about your offices and your real estate and how you're going to get people back in and get back to quote unquote normal. And whether or not we'll still have this sort of remote or distributed work as a component of work. My belief is that there's some fundamental shift that we have gone through in our mindset about work. In the book, in the Next Rules of Work, I talk about mindset, skill set, and tool set. And I think many of us, many organizations, many workers have gone through a mindset shift where in the past, we had this almost sort of binary relationship to work. It's like we're an employee or we're not. We had geographical location that we were kind of anchored to. Many organizations thought of their employees as almost wholly owned entities. And I think we've gone through a mindset shift where in many cases, not in all work, but certainly in work that is more information-based work, more work that is supported by technology, we've gone into a different phase where now we're going to think differently about how a human links up to dynamically bind around problems. And we're going to have a range of new work roles. We're not going to have anywhere near the anchors in geography that we did in the past. And I think the mindset shift will become more and more of what I call not a workforce, but a work net. That is a whole bunch of human beings that are all this fabric of skills that are dynamically binding around problems. And today we call those jobs and we call those organizations. And tomorrow, I think it's going to look much more like a constantly moving fabric of human skills applied to problems.
So I like that concept of the fabric and the work net versus the workforce. Will there be a time when, as employees, we are essentially amalgamating careers by sharing skills with a variety of employers, and the organizations, instead of looking kind of monolithic like today, they're really loose-knit collections of employees sharing unique skills?
So that is certainly what I think is going to be an increasingly common use case for work. So think of the traditional employee role as one use case, only one employer, one job, one location, one paycheck. But increasingly, what happens is a young person comes out of college, and sure, they might get they're out of vocational school or high school, and they might get a day job, but then they take a gap month with their friends and they're learning online, and then they're driving for Uber at night and they're working on a startup with their friends. It's a constantly moving landscape of work and leisure and learning. And that, I think, is a portfolio of work. So I believe that will be an increasingly common model. Parents ask me all the time, why won't my son or daughter, why won't they get a real job? And the answer is it's a hedge strategy against an exponentially changing future of work.
So for younger listeners who are thinking about what career to go into, we're facing this kind of meta trend about the fundamental nature of work changing. And we're also facing potential competition from automation. So it's a confusing time to be a kid in college and trying to figure out what you want to be.
Yeah.
What's your advice about the skills that kids in college should be learning now that will, succeed the test of time?
So first off, I ask again for parents, for students, and then for educators and administrators in colleges to all have a mindset shift. And the first step is to dial down the temperature on the importance of that near-term decision. That window of the young adult launchpad of the 18 to 22-year-old. If instead we think of it as simply your first real relationship with work, but your relationship with work is going to keep on changing in all likelihood. Now, there might still be some jobs where you can get trained in school and then you're going to be in the same field and have a very similar job for decades. But that, again, is an increasingly less likely use case for work. It's much more likely that your relationship with work is going to keep on changing on a dynamic basis. And that's going to happen for two reasons. It's going to happen because the landscape of work itself is changing. And it's going to happen because you, as an individual, as a human being, have this wide range of skills and capacities and interests that you can continually explore. So step one, dial down the temperature. Don't get so over-indexed on the belief that you need to have this incredibly critical time of your life that you learn everything you need to be able to have a career in the future. Instead, think of it as one phase. The second is to be thinking about less of the knowledges that we had to gather in the past and much more on what I call the flex skills. So the know skills, those bodies of knowledge, the more and more information is going to be learned just in time and just in context. That is, you're going to look at your digital distraction device and watch YouTube videos and solve the problem that's right in front of you. And you're going to do that while you're solving the problem, just in time and just in context. But those flex skills, those skills that are usable in a range of situations, there's hundreds of them that each of us have, from collaborating to critical thinking to analyzing problems. If I have to pick four, I call them PACE. We need to all become problem solvers who are adaptive, creative, and with empathy. Problem solvers because, as my father found with What Color's Your Parachute, if you present yourself to a potential hirer as a problem solver, you're far more likely to get hired. Adaptive because there's nothing in life that's certain but exponential change. And we clearly saw that in the Great Reset. Creative because that's what's going to keep you ahead of robots and software. And with empathy because it is your capacity to be able to empathize with the needs of a customer, with the needs of society, that will allow you also to stay ahead of the robots and software and to be able to continually have your own North Star in the kinds of problems that you most want to solve.
Your dad anticipated the pandemic, it sounds like.
Well, you said I wouldn't. I don't claim the responsibility of talking about the 3 boxes of life. That's actually a book that he wrote after What Color's Your Parachute. He actually there are predecessors to that. People who wrote books about the topic generally, but people seem to like that whole idea that there's a facet of you that's focused on work, a facet that's focused on learning, and a facet that's focused on leisure or other aspects of your life.
So here's a thought experiment for you. In a kind of existential sense, so much of our identity as humans is wrapped up in our work. And let's say fast forward, maybe not into the distant future, maybe it's only 10 years from now. Potentially we can generate the same output as we could maybe in 7 hours, in 7 hours in 10 years, what we could do in 8 hours today. So let's say you get back 10 to 15% of your life. What do we do as humans to rediscover our essence or recreate our identities when, all of a sudden 10 to 15% of our lives may be freed up to do other things than work?
No, that's an excellent question. So first off, it is potentially a luxury that humans will have that time freed up and will still be making as much money as they need for their lifestyles to allow them to do that. And there's plenty of economies where that is, especially those that are highly informal economies, where that's simply not possible. If you're not working, your free time means you make less money. And so a couple of things. So first off, there are many advantages in the ways that we think about ourselves when we have an image that is a self-image that is reliant on work. I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a plumber, but there's also disadvantages. And so the old rules of work, that wasn't even a choice. You were your occupation. The next rules, what I believe is increasingly going to be a use case for work, is that we will understand more about what makes us unique, understand more about our own skills, understand more about our own experiences, the things that fascinate us, the kinds of problems that we most want to solve. So the more that we have our own North Star or Southern Cross that drives us, that helps us to continually be moving in a direction, whether or not that direction, the things that we're doing that give us satisfaction, are in the context of paid work, or they're in the context of the things that we want to learn, or the things we want our community to be able to be enabled to do, or the kinds of people that we want to be able to help, or just generally the experiences that I want to have. We used to do an exercise, actually, when I was on my father's staff, called the $10 million exercise. And I think I've included this in one of my courses with a shout out to him, which now, I believe it or not, have 850,000 learners. There's been a lot of usage in the Great Reset of those courses. But one of I said, my father had people, we'd ask them a question: if I gave you $10 million, what would you do with your time? And of course, the first step is you pay a lot, you're going to go buy all the things you want. And then the second step, everybody wants to travel. Okay, you've done all those things. Now what do you do? And what you find is if you give people freedom, that is, if you unbundle or you break apart the need to work 40, 60, 80 hours a week and to be able to generate the kind of income that they want for the lifestyle that they want, you find that there's this sort of crossover point where if you help people to understand their own skills and what fascinates them and the kinds of things that they most want to be able to direct their time, there's tons of different opportunities to be able to continue to grow and change and to be able to solve problems without the need to worry about whether or not you take in money. So many people want to start companies. Many people want to be able to collaborate with others to be able to solve problems in their community. We haven't found, as we used to take thousands of people through these workshops, we haven't found it actually ends up being a significant problem. I know that this has been the problem that many philosophers have opined about in the past. But the truth is that as humans, there's so many different things to learn and do in the world. All that's really needed is to help activate people about those passions, to help them be able to find the things that can motivate them.
So this is a discussion that is timely and it's imminent. I think in the next 20 years, it's probably not too controversial to say technology will replace most jobs that are either dull, dirty, or dangerous, the 3 Ds. And what that will do is, we'll call it liberate many employees who have those jobs today. As a society, should we be thinking about universal basic income? Is it our obligation to find new identities for those laborers, or what? How do we deal with this as a society?
So I'm going to give you two frameworks. And the first is sort of how we think about what we do as humans, and the second is what we do as societies and economies. So the first framing for us as humans is, anybody who looks at the Next Rules book will see that I'm a huge fan of Venn diagrams and magic quadrants. So the magic quadrant to point to is, if you think of this axis is what we're good at, and this axis is what we love doing, Down here in this lower left-hand corner, we're not very good at it, and we don't particularly love it. It's often very repetitive tasks that are kind of mind-numbing. The 3Ds that you talked about, that's the work down here. Well, that's the work that's going to get automated. I mean, it's just absolutely where a lot of the innovation, Silicon Valley and beyond, is focused, whether it's robots or robotic process automation. It's this upper right-hand quadrant where humans are really highly motivated. It's either skills we love to use, problems we love to solve, things we're good at, and we love doing them. And so we don't find that actually, if you give people the opportunity to do the self-inventory of their skills and to envision what those kinds of things are, they might not be good at it yet, but if they love doing it, they will just get better and better at it. So again, we don't find it's too hard to help to activate people to see what those kinds of opportunities are. The problem with automation is that if you keep on automating more and more of the tasks as you move up into the magic quadrant, sure, there might be a number of companies that would say, oh, that's just freeing up the time for our workers. But a 100% freed up worker, we call in the US unemployed. So now what you need is the other side of the equation is, what do societies and economies do? Well, at the same time that the US went from 3.5% to 4% unemployment to 17% unemployment, the economies of Germany and the Nordic countries, they went from about 5 to 5.7% unemployment. And that's because on their end of the way they designed their economies, a 100% freed up worker is not necessarily unemployed. The employer has a lot of obligations and responsibilities, but so does the worker. The worker has a lot of obligations and responsibilities to continually make themselves relevant, keep learning the new things. And so this is a long-winded answer to your question about basic income, or what's often called universal basic income, UBI. But what ends up happening is, if you think of the way that workers matched up to work, if there's a whole bunch of things that societies want, which is that people continue to have good incomes, they're continuing to do work that fascinates them, they're doing work that society needs, you add up all of those things, and then you put some obligations on the worker to continually be retrained, to continually gather new skills and continually find ways they want to keep on moving to that upper right quadrant. And you have employers that have responsibilities for how they continually offer more and more training, and they keep people employed even in a downturn, or help them to be able to connect to new work. If you have all of those pieces in place, then a basic income for a range of workers makes a ton of sense if what you want is a society to ensure that no human is left behind. If what you care about is that no human goes to bed at night hungry or without a roof over their head, then a basic income is an obligation. Now, it doesn't mean that it has to be universal. It doesn't mean that every single human needs to have that kind of safety net, needs to fill in the gaps, which are unfortunately very common in many economies. What it does mean is that if you think of the balance of the way that a lot of economies work and our own peculiar form of capitalism here in the United States, the table is actually extremely unbalanced. And so what ends up happening is you get a whole bunch of people that fall off the table very, very quickly. And so it actually is a tremendous opportunity for us to make much more inclusive economies. That's actually the focus of the final chapter of the book, is what is the world that we all want? How would you design those more inclusive economies so that everybody that wanted to have access to meaningful, well-paid work could have access, and when they didn't, we would have the systems in place so that they would not be left behind?
In Silicon Valley, we are obsessed with this idea of the fusion of people with machines. And I don't have a Venn diagram for this. I don't even have a magic quadrant. But let's say on that spectrum between human and machine, we're, at least in Silicon Valley, we're pushing the boundaries through various kinds of biohacking, and you got Neuralink from Elon Musk and implants, various ways to test our limits as a species. What is it that ultimately will define a human? At what point do you say there's enough machine in that human that it's no longer a human? What's the essence of being human?
So I want to answer your question generally in the essence of being human, and then specifically in the context of work. So first off, again, philosophers going back to Socrates have speculated for quite some time about technology, robots, even though the label wasn't used back then, and the increasing dependence of humans on technology and the increasing blurred line between humans and their technology. So a couple of, again, framing ways to mindset ways to think about this. Again, I talk about mindset, skill set, and tool set. Silicon Valley, we lead a lot with the tool set. We think of the technology as being the enabler, of being the thing we lead with. And if we see a human performing a specific task with their skills, we keep thinking about, okay, how can we automate that? Because humans are messy and expensive. And if we can get them out of the way, then we'll, again, free them up. Not always the result. But we also can blur the line because we can give humans more and more technologies to augment what they do. Now, any of your listeners that are fascinated by this, you can read books like Ray Kurzweil, co-founder of Singularity University, and his book, The Singularity is Near. His next one is The Singularity is Nearer. So I guess his next one will be Singularity is Nearest. But Ray talks a lot about this sort of transhuman or post-human world. So a couple of things. First off, we are so far from that crossover point that my worry about thinking about it too much, and I've got 2,000 science fiction paperbacks in my basement from my ill-spent youth, so I've thought about this a lot, but if we spend too much time worrying about it or trying to factor for it as a society, we miss something, because essentially what we do is we run the risk of so over amping our focus on the technology, and that the technology itself becomes much more of what defines how we operate as a society. And we lose track of the human. So there may be some crossover point where we have, a Star Trek-like point at which our technology is much more of what we might think of as our minds, our bodies, these extensions of ourselves. But we're so far from that. What I urge people to do instead is to not think of it as a false equivalency. That is, a lot of what ends up happening is we have this slippery slope where we put more and more of our tool set into the dialogue, especially when we think about work. And we think of that as essentially being a replacement for humans. And so I worry about that significantly, because I think that actually is framing it completely wrong. What ends up happening is we put a huge amount of our energy and our capital in Silicon Valley to automating those human tasks. And that's what our venture capital system is based on. And that's what a huge amount of the technological buying in the enterprise is based on, is ways to continually try to reduce the costs and increase the effectiveness and efficiency of those tasks that were performed by humans. If we took the same amount of energy and we instead looked at all the technologies we could be building to allow humans to be able to understand their own skills more rapidly, develop skills more rapidly, solve problems more rapidly, collaborate with others more rapidly, we would have a golden age of the capacity of humans expanding, having each of us to have this untapped capacity that we simply don't use as much. We don't know our own skills. We're not rapidly able to develop new skills, most of us. We would have this tremendous amount of human potential that we would unlock. That's where I would like to really focus people's attention. I'm not too worried about a crossover point where that technology becomes so much more human, because I think we fooled ourselves into thinking that we're really close to that. And I think we're actually much farther than we might believe. Instead, we are close to having the capacity to turn so many of these technologies into helping augment humans.
I love that notion of the golden age where we unlock the true potential of humans. You got a lot of marauding capitalists listening to you right now on the podcast. Sometimes we call them entrepreneurs. Yeah. And what they're great at doing is hearing visionary statements like that one and thinking about how to exploit them for economic gain, at risk of sounding overly cynical. What are some opportunities from your vantage point where entrepreneurs could potentially catalyze or accelerate that golden age?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, I think that there's unlimited opportunity because when you again look back at history, you look at some of the great reset, or some of the previous resets we've gone through, and now with the Great Reset, what ends up happening is you get this recalibration and a reframing. And so because I've been around Silicon Valley since the early 1980s, these sort of waves of technology development and adoption, they follow pretty consistent patterns. And so the pattern we're going to likely experience is that within a year or two, so many of the people that are seeing the problems that we're encountering today, many of those entrepreneurs are going to have found ways to be able to take a step function leap forward and to be able to come up with some 10x solutions to a range of the challenges that we're dealing with today. So I'll just point to a couple different areas that I think are ripe for innovation, and there are actually quite a number of innovators that are thinking about these arenas. I think of the possibilities as being nearly unlimited. So I'll just give you a couple of them. First is that in the space of learning as humans, we are on the cusp of understanding so much better how our human minds work, how we learn, how we develop skills, how we solve problems. And those leaps forward in neuroscience are having these tremendous ripple effects in the technologies that we develop, and vice versa. So I believe that we are going to crack the code on human skills. I've got an initiative called the Skills Genome Project, where we've got a range of innovators around the world all collaborating on that. So there's a huge amount of opportunity to be able to think about the tools that we would need to be able to learn faster, solve problems faster, and so on. And that's going to have a huge number of ripple effects on our institutions. I've written pieces like Unbundling Higher Education, where I map out this vision of the way that how we learn, especially as young adults and older adults, is going to go through a tremendous sea change in the way those institutions operate. So that's yet another arena of opportunity. If you look at the media industry and how that went through a tectonic shift with the influence of the internet, we're going to see all the same shift in how we learn. And that will eventually work its way deeper and deeper down into the K-12 arena. It's also a tremendous opportunity to think about the way that organizations interconnect with each other. If you buy my vision of a worknet, what's going to happen is that the walls of organizations, the traditional walls, I think the old rules of work, the organization was a box with really, really hard walls. It's either an employee or not. If you think instead of that softened walls and the worknet of being interconnected networks, you actually painted a little of this picture earlier. Yes, you will likely have people who will traverse the boundaries of what we traditionally call organizations and do that much more rapidly. And technology, again, is going to enable people to be able to do that, to stand up new structures of value, which today we call an organization, and tomorrow we might call a digitally autonomous organization, to be able to continually think of new ways that humans can dynamically bind around problems. So that's another arena. And then yet another one that is ripe for innovation is going to be the ways that we continually help different industries to automate so many of the various facets of how they interact and those organizations, so that you can have much more resilient supply chains, you can have much more resilient work design, you can have much more resilient ways that communities are able to help their own citizens to be able to dynamically bind around problems. And all of those will be collaborative networks that we've not even conceived of what the technology could look like yet. We're still on the cusp of even understanding how humans at scale can rapidly and dynamically bind together to solve problems. So just a couple of ideas, but each one of those is potentially a brand new industry.
Profound and thought-provoking. So I got to get you off the hot seat, Gary, but I'm really curious to get your answer to this one last question. So as a prolific speaker and writer, particularly, that you've given talks at a blistering pace last year, something bizarre that happened to you in the context of, maybe a virtual event or just something that stands out where you were like scratching your head and being like, I didn't foresee this one.
So I wouldn't say bizarre so much as life affirming and fascinating. So one of the things that I've said for a long time is because I'm a recovering journalist. I used to be the editorial director of a half a dozen technology magazines. And in 1994, I helped to found this magazine called Interactive Week, which we called the internet's first newspaper. And we kind of thought, oh, this internet thing, it might be big. In 1994, that wasn't certain. But one of the things that I used to write about at that time was that I believed not only there was going to be this golden era of access to information, which unfortunately we have today. It's not quite all the positive things that I thought it was going to be. But I also said I thought that we were going to be highly interconnected as human beings. So one thing that I didn't actually anticipate is that in the Great Reset, in a global pandemic, I would see so many different examples around the world of people going through exactly the same experience. So I did two different lectures that just blew my mind. One was UNICEF actually asked me to talk to 140 educators around the world. So I literally had the Zoom call with 140 educators looking into their homes, into their eyes, into their lives very early on in the pandemic. And they were understandably completely overwhelmed. They'd never been trained for this. And in countries ranging from Singapore to India. And it was so clear, even though almost everybody on the call spoke a different language, that they were all living through the same lived experience, no matter where in the world they were. I mean, absolutely stunning. And then the second was I've ended up doing a series of talks for a school system in India called Ishavidya. And I would literally see on the video for the Zoom call, I'd see one eye from the sister and one eye from the brother in a family, because that's how they were doing their homework. They were sheltering in place in their homes as the pandemic was raging, but they wanted to stay connected to learning. And this was the only way, off of some little feature phones, was still trying to stay connected to their teachers and to their fellow students and to learning. And for me to have the privilege of being able to speak to those young minds and to talk to them about the exponential future that they were entering into was just one of the most life-affirming experiences you can imagine, because here I was given the chance to try to give them just that little bit of inspiration that would help to keep them engaged with their learning and ultimately engaged with the world of work.
Amazing example. The example that I was going to give wasn't quite as impactful. I didn't speak to a global audience of UNICEF educators, but I was invited in 2019 to give a talk on the future of work to an audience in Montreal. And there were two things that were odd about that arrangement. One is that it turns out they were all French speaking, and I speak I speak very little French, and so that was disappointing. And some of the jokes just didn't quite land as well. And the second thing was, I kid you not, it was in a petting zoo. And so in addition to competing with yes, they were French goats.
Yeah.
I think it's what's it, Camembert cheese? Is it Camembert? There's a French goat cheese, I believe, and it clearly comes from Montreal. But so that speaking engagement did not start off the way I was expecting, but didn't have quite the same impact or the same challenges as yours.
Yeah, but I'm sure there are these adorable little things you could pet after you were done. So
absolutely, and I'm sure great cheese was produced during the event. So there was that. All right, Gary, this has been so much fun. Again, the book is The Next Rules of Work. It's coming out in a few days, or possibly when you're listening to this, it will be available for sale. Gary, anything else our audience should know about the book, or anything you want to share about it?
So listen, the one thing I would suggest to anybody going through this period is I think we, as humans, we understandably often deal with these stressful times in a variety of different ways. None of us, very few of us alive, have had to deal with a global pandemic before, and certainly not in modern times. And so a couple of things. first, please just continually be thinking about your own mental and emotional health and being able to navigate this. Secondly, with work, I know that, again, many stressful aspects of this, but also we've seen in the Great Reset a lot of rethinking about people's own work. That is what I believe is the Great Reset has given us a new start date. It's given us a new way to think about work and to make it more human centric. And if you have the power as a person who hires in an organization, if you have the power as somebody who leads in an organization, keep on pushing more and more to maintain those aspects that keep this human centric. It's easy for us to bungee cord back to the old ways that we worked, but there were many, many limitations of the old rules of work. And in the next rules of work, what I hope is that each of us will take the learnings, that understanding the lived experience of the people that we work with, of being able to ensure that they have the chance to spend time with their kids at soccer games and take care of sick family and have much more flexible work. We keep those elements that maintain the human centricity of work as we hopefully all build back better.
In 85 episodes, I've never assigned homework on this podcast, but consider this an assignment to all listeners. Go buy the book, go read it. It's your own private audience with the great Gary Bolles. And with that said, Gary, again, thanks. I've really enjoyed this discussion. Wish we could do it more often and wish it was longer.
All right, Dan, thanks a bunch.
Yeah, you bet.
Thanks for all the witty banter.
Is your host of AI and the Future of Work, Dan Turchin, signing off this week, but back next week with another fascinating guest.